Todd Snider, the influential alt-country singer-songwriter behind hits such as Alright Guy, has died at the age of 59. The news was confirmed today, November 15th, by a statement on Snider's social media accounts. No cause of death has been given, but his family have said he had recently been hospitalized with pneumonia. Aimless Inc. headquarters is heartbroken to share that our founder, our folk hero, our poet of the world, our vice president of the abrupt change department, the storyteller, our beloved Todd Daniel Snider has departed this world. Read the message on Instagram. Where do we find the words for the one who always had the right words? Who knew how to distill everything down to its essence with words and song, while delivering the most devastating, hilarious, and impactful turn of phrases? It continued, he relayed so much tenderness and sensitivity through his songs, and showed many of us how to look at the world through a different lens. He got up every morning and started writing, always working towards finding his place among the songwriting giants that sat on his record shelves. Those same giants who led him into their lives and took him under their wings, who he studied relentlessly. Guy Clark, John Prine, Chris Christopherson, Jerry Jeff Walker. Snider had recently canceled the remainder of a U.S. tour due to severe injuries as the victim of a violent assault outside of his hotel in Salt Lake City. Snider was born in Portland, Oregon, and relocated to Texas in the 1980s, where he began his music career. He later became associated with the Nashville alt-country scene, with his 2004 album East Nashville Skyline particularly well remembered. He was renowned for his witty, poignant lyrical style, deeply influenced by the likes of John Prine, Guy Clark, and Chris Christopherson, and his work helped to define the modern sound of Americana. Among those to pay tribute to Snider were Jason Isbell, who wrote on Threads, Freak Flags at half-staff for the storyteller, and all the songs he still had left to write. I sure did love him. Todd Snider's passing sent a shockwave through the entire Americana and alt-country community, not merely because of the loss of yet another musician, but because of the sudden disappearance of a storyteller who seemed woven into the very soul of contemporary folk music. His presence had become one of those quiet constants people didn't notice until it was gone. The familiar drawl, the half-crooked grin, the eternal baseball cap, the way he greeted every crowd like he had known them for years, even if it was the first time he had ever stepped foot into their town. To understand why so many people were devastated, one had to understand the type of artist he was, not a stadium-selling superstar with an army of publicists, but a road warrior, a troubadour of the old style, who spent decades living out of vans, buses, green rooms, and half-lit bars where his voice and his presence always filled the room. Long before his boots crossed the threshold, people who loved him didn't just admire the music. They admired the man because he made them feel seen, understood, and accompanied in their own struggles. His lyrics weren't built on metaphors so obscure that listeners had to untangle them. Instead, he told the truth plainly, almost disarmingly, in a way that made people laugh, then think, then suddenly feel their throat tighten with unexpected emotion. That was the magic of Todd Snider, the ability to take the most ordinary experience, the type of moment most people forget 5 minutes after it happens, and turn it into a piece of immortality. His friends often said Todd never tried to be profound. He simply was, by accident. He would talk about a broken lawn chair, a strange encounter at a gas station, a night spent lost in East Nashville, or some hilarious misadventure on the road, and somehow, through the way he spoke, those small fragments of life transformed into poetry. Fans left his shows with the sense that they hadn't merely watched a performance, but had sat through a long, meandering, deeply personal conversation with someone who had lived many lives. In the days following his death, stories began pouring out from musicians, fans, venue owners, and ordinary people who had crossed paths with him. Some recounted chance encounters, Todd smoking outside a venue and striking up a conversation as if he had known them all his life. Others remembered how he could be self-deprecating in the funniest way, often joking about how he was still surprised anyone ever paid to hear him play in the first place. And many recalled how generosity was woven into his personality. He would drive for hours to perform at a benefit concert for someone he barely knew. He would give away his guitar strings, his harmonicas, even the hat off his head if he thought it would lift someone else's spirits. To his fans, Todd Snider wasn't some distant figure on a pedestal. He was accessible, vulnerable, imperfect, funny, and heartbreakingly sincere. He admitted openly in interviews that he battled hardships, addiction, depression, loneliness, the psychological wear and tear of life spent on the road. He told these stories not to glamorize them but to show people that even their favorite artists weren't immune to the same challenges everyone else faced. In doing so, he made listeners feel less alone in their own battles. His death especially under the cloud of pneumonia and the mystery surrounding the violent assault he endured days earlier, carried a heaviness that lingered like an unanswered question. People wondered what really happened that night outside his hotel. They wondered whether the injuries worsened the pneumonia, or whether the pneumonia left him vulnerable to the physical trauma. They wondered whether this was one of those tragic moments where fate seemed to deal someone too fragile a hand. But in many ways, people also understood that Todd had lived a life full of chaos, beauty, and unpredictability, and that he had somehow woven all of that into the fabric of his music. Todd's early years in Portland shaped him, but it was Texas that truly carved his artistic identity. When he moved there in the 1980s, he was young, wide-eyed, and hungry for the kind of life that didn't fit inside office walls or suburban routines. Texas became his classroom, filled with honky-tonks that never slept, with grizzled musicians who had been on the scene long before he was born, with the city streets buzzing with stories that felt like song lyrics waiting to be written. He soaked it all in, but more importantly, he learned how to listen, a skill that would later become the foundation of his songwriting. In Texas, Todd met the kind of people who would shape him in ways no formal education ever could. They were drifters, poets, musicians, bartenders, dreamers, and people who lived the type of raw, unfiltered lives others only read about. Through them, he learned how to tell stories truthfully, not with the polished, over-processed tone that record labels loved, but with the honesty that resonated with people who had actually lived through hard times. When he later moved to Nashville, he carried these lessons with him like talismans. Worn and precious, Nashville didn't immediately embrace him the way some would assume. His humor, irreverence, and willingness to challenge the norm made him stand out. Yet slowly, the city noticed him. It noticed the sharp intelligence behind the jokes, the tenderness behind the rebellious attitude, the sincerity behind his offbeat personality. And somewhere along the way, the giants he idolized, Guy Clark, John Prine, Chris Christopherson, not only took notice but welcomed him into their circle. For Todd, this wasn't merely validation. It was a spiritual homecoming. These were the men whose records he had worn thin through years of obsessive study. These were the storytellers who taught him without ever meeting him that vulnerability was strength, that humor could coexist with heartbreak, and that truth didn't need embellishment to be powerful. To be accepted by them was like being invited into a sacred lineage, one he respected profoundly. His album East Nashville Skyline marked a turning point in his career. It was raw, eccentric, thoughtful, and infused with a self-awareness that made it feel like a diary written in real time. The album didn't just resonate with fans of Americana. It helped define what the genre would become in the 21st century. It stood as a reminder that alt country wasn't about commercial polish but about storytelling stripped to its bones. Even those who had never heard of Todd Snider before today found themselves listening to his music after the news broke. They discovered a discography filled with humor that made them laugh out loud unexpectedly, with lines so insightful they felt like someone had opened a window into their soul. They discovered a man who wasn't afraid to sing about insecurity, failure, mistakes, second chances, and the strange, beautiful, painful journey of simply being human.